This is episode number 300 of Bill Whittle Now. And who is Bill Whittle Now? Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, I first of all just want to pay tribute to the members at BillWhittle.com who have made it possible for us to record these 300 episodes in the last year or so, as well as our friends over at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, who have come alongside of us in a co-promotional effort. If you haven't checked out the Patriot Post yet, we'll give you a link in the description below so you can do so. Bill, it occurs to me that you've been at this game for a long time, starting out first as an essayist, in essence, on the internet as a blogger, but long-form blogs, and then eventually into video format. When did you start writing Eject?
Why?
When?
December of 2002.
December 2002. And I guess that my follow-up question would be, why? What sparked you to do that? And my understanding is that before that, you weren't the most aggressively political person you'd ever met.
I'd never thought about politics. I honestly hadn't. Over the course of the years, I'd found myself becoming more and more conservative. My dad was conservative, and we didn't talk politics in the house at all. I didn't know whether he was a Republican or a Democrat till I was probably 14 or something. 14 years, not 14 months, is in the case of many people with left-wing parents today. And so, I just basically had a conservative start. I wanted to be in the military. I wanted to fly jets for the Air Force. So I spent 12 years preparing for that, learning astronomy and physics and all the rest of the stuff. I failed the vision test for the Air Force Academy as a pilot. And they said I could be a navigator or a bombardier, but that didn't sound too much fun to me. I just said, "You mean a passenger?" And so in order to rescue myself from this overwhelming shock, a bunch of friends of mine took me out in the summer of '76 in Miami, and we were making Super 8 movies, silent ones at first, and they were doing like spy parodies, and I did a couple. Played like a minor role and got my foot stuck in the fork of a tree and got some laughs out of that, and I really enjoyed it. So then I ended up writing some of those things. And next thing you know, I'm at the University of Florida as a theater major, surrounded by extremely liberal people. They're no different now than they were then. And when you're surrounded by people like that, especially emotional people like actors, I've repeated this endlessly because it's just such a good description of what my life was like then. I was passionately concerned with things that I knew nothing about. Nothing. And so that kind of gives me some insight into, how some of these social justice warriors work and so on. Anyway, I continued on in entertainment. I'd wanted to write and direct. I'd had a chance to do a number of spec scripts for Cheers. I never wrote an episode that made it on the air, but I went to 4 writers' meetings and turned in 4 spec scripts, which they liked. That was fun. Drove a limousine, went back to Florida, did a sketch comedy show in Florida in Gainesville around '94. We did about 150 segments of a sketch comedy show that was really fun. Came back out to LA. And found myself working as an editor, which is the guy at the end of the parade who's basically sweeping up the horse manure, He's like the last guy there. I always thought it was the least interesting part of the job. But I made my living as an editor out here for many years, 10, 15 years, doing documentaries for Discovery Channel, History Channel, that kind of thing. Got a 5-year job on Sunday Morning Shootout with Peter Bart and Peter Guber on AMC. And then after all of that setup, this would be 2002, August of 2002. We were getting ready to go to war in Iraq. 9/11 had already happened, wasn't a year old yet. And my father was interred at Arlington. His ashes were interred at Arlington. I've been reading a lot of Stephen Den Best at USS Clueless, and I stumbled upon a blog which was Will Wheaton's, and that wasn't much fun, but I'd never heard the term before. And then I actually went to James Lilacs and his Institute for Official Cheer, and I just thought, this is awesome. So my dad had a ceremony at Arlington, and I was so moved by this. And this was in the months prior to really going into Iraq, and the war was on in Afghanistan, and 9/11 still very fresh on people's minds. And already the pushback had started, oh, we deserved it. It's our fault if we just get out of there, blah, blah, blah. And I went to the ceremony at Arlington, and I was so moved by it. I was so impressed by the fact that the headstones are all the same. You have a major general sitting right next to a private. And it just had a profound effect on me. It basically blew all of the crud off of me is what it did. All of those years of accumulated cynicism and stuff, just kind of those trumpets opened up just as we came into the sunshine, and it just remade me. So I wrote about that day. I did like a two-page letter, and I sent it to Stephen Denbest because he was talking an awful lot about morale at the time, U.S. morale versus Iraqi morale and structure of the army and so on. He ran it. A lot of people responded to it. And then the second piece of the puzzle that got me writing Eject was I was a huge fan and remain a fan of Rachel Lucas, who had a very active blog back then. And just in the course of reading her blog one day, she put up a post that said, I have a friend who wants to buy a gun. Most of the people she knows told her it's a bad idea. Can anybody make an argument for why you should own one? And I'm not kidding now. I had not ever given the thing a moment's thought, ever. Never crossed my mind. But I managed to put together a number of comments that seemed to be impressive. And Rachel Lucas said, you've got to start writing a blog. And to her absolute undying credit, for which I'm eternally grateful, she actually set up the blog. I did the graphics. I decided to call it Eject because that was how I viewed my all of those years I'd spent as a liberal. I was never a progressive. I always loved America, always loved the military, always pro-business. Being a liberal back then was considerably different than today. But I remember thinking that, the plane I was flying in had been struck by heat-seeking reality, and it was time to get out of that worldview.
By the way, Rachel Lucas helped me start my blog as well. And I'll bet you there are many others who could parade in front of a camera and say the same thing.
I don't know if she's going to watch this or whether she still follows any of it, but bless your heart, Rachel Lucas, you not only went to the trouble of setting up a lot of blogs, but you encouraged so many people, and we really miss you.
She's terrific. Bill, in the intervening years, I mean, we saw the Tea Party movement come, and then I was going to say go, but it didn't really go. It just became the new normal, so to speak,
That's right.
for conservatives. And you got into producing videos at PJ TV, and that has never stopped. So you've seen a pretty long span of time as internet time goes. Our show, Right Angle, is probably one of the longest running, consistently produced, nonstop shows on the internet.
I think we did 5,000 trifecta, Scott, before we became Right Angle. I think I did a rough sketch, thumbnail sketch. Yeah, something like that.
We're the Gunsmoke of internet panel discussion shows.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So, in any case, Bill, you've seen a lot during that time. What have you seen that's made it worth your continuing to plug away at this task day after day, week after week for so many years?
Needless to say, all of us got started at PJTV, and I want to say I think I got there in mid-2008, before Obama's election. I know I watched his election at PJTV. And by the way, I was hired as an editor, and they knew who I was through my writing. And I remember this so distinctly. I thought, this is actually a pretty decent essay. If I could just find somebody who could read this on camera and wasn't using this little girl voice, we could find somebody to deliver this might not be too bad. I just want to throw this in since you asked. I remember that there was a crisis in the very early days of PJTV when they're just learning how to do it. They had a tremendous control room, as you remember, and everything was done live. And somebody came out into the kind of the main area and said, "Our host is stuck in traffic. Does anybody here know how to read a teleprompter?" I do. I'd had some background as an acting student, but I'd never read a teleprompter in my life. And I went in there, and the only thing I remember was watching. We're talking about the first days of PJTV now, when they would say, "Okay, so now we're going to go we're going to go take a look at some footage from Washington D.C." And you'd see the hosts, and the stuff wasn't ready, and they'd be on camera. It's what? What? When do you? How?
It was pretty slick.
You want me to just keep? Okay, it was live. This is going out live, and I suppose on some level, having done hundreds of planetarium narrations and been on stage a few times and had other people screw up on stage, I remember I did it. I enjoyed it, and they asked me to do it again. And very quickly, something like that happened. There's something to the effect, Scotty, of teleprompter says something like, "Okay, now we've got some footage coming in from our reporter down at the floor of the GOP convention. John, what have you got?" That footage is not ready yet. You know what? Before we get to John, let's talk about what a convention actually is. You know, it's like a and the ability to think on your feet is important in that business.
But you've kept at it, and that's the thing that stuns me, because a lot of people have come and gone in that process, and the people who have stayed sort of in the political commentary world tend to be those people at the top end of the food chain who are making huge money doing this. But your persistence through
at the bottom of the food chain
at modest rewards has been remarkable, to quote Wolf Blitzer.
For many, many years. The stuff just, the firewalls and the afterburners came just pouring out of me. I don't know the actual number. I think somebody did a rough calculation. I think I may have done 300 of them, which seems incredible, because if you'd asked me, I'd said maybe I did 7 or 8. But I think, including all the afterburners and stuff, it's something like almost 300 of them, or maybe even more. And I've been doing a great deal of work on this upcoming 10-part podcast. For the same folks I did the Apollo 11 thing on, 10 hours on the Cold War. And that's easily a book, and I've had to write it in 2 months. It's well over 120,000 words now, and it's been consuming all my time, but I think it's very, very good. But the point I'm trying to make is that there came a point when I didn't know how to say anything new without just simply rehashing the stuff I'd said. And I want to be kind of clear on that. One of the things that I found always disturbing about live events is I would go in and I would speak about a particular topic in any given year. And over the course of 2 or 3 speaking events, I'd get that really polished. I'd get it the way I'd liked it, and it was as tight as it could be, and it got laughs in the right places. So then I would go out and do it again. And a couple of times I thought, I need to do this a little differently just to make it different. And every time I made it different, it made it worse. And I remember, and I still feel this way, feeling a little ashamed that I'm giving this pretty much the same way I always have, but it's no different really than a rock band that goes out and play the same songs every night, or a comedian who has the same routine, at least for a tour. You're giving each audience the best version of what you've got, and that means they're more or less the same. So I think that the idea of just constantly rehashing stuff is really a little disturbing, which is why I like the format of this show so much, because we're dealing with events as they're happening in real time, and trying to get a handle on them through the lens of the philosophy. They're definitely coming back. I'm on episode 8 now, and I've got 2 to go. But it is difficult to talk about foundational principles when you've done 300, 7 or 8 minute videos on foundational principles. It's difficult to talk about them without sounding like I'm cutting and pasting the stuff before. And the stuff before was the best version that I know how to do that.
In the context of today, do you feel any different about who you're reaching and how you have to reach them than you did, say, 15 years ago? I guess I'm just wondering, do you look back at some of your old stuff, if ever you should do such a thing, and think, wow, I could never do that today, only because nobody would listen to it today? Things have changed. Or do you think really people haven't changed that much, and if you put on a fresh tie, you could do the same script today and have as great an impact?
That's a superb question. Sometimes I do look back. I look back in anger, and I like most people who are either artists or actors or painters or whatever. Most people like that, and I'm one of them, find it almost impossible to look at work that we've done any significant length of time ago. And that's actually usually good news, because presumably you've improved over the time. And when you look at stuff that you did very early, you think, my God, I just had no idea what I was doing. So I certainly could not. I wrote a collection of essays from Eject, Eject, Eject in a book called Silent America. And I could certainly not write that book today. That book was much more optimistic than I am now. And in a lot of levels, it was more naive than I am now. And this is a really important point, but the one thing that has remained consistent over the 15 years that I've been doing this now, 17 years, is that although the environment has become much more cynical and much more cutthroat, and that ability to talk about America without reservations, as like free country and all the rest of it, is gone temporarily, I believe. The values are the same, and the reaction in the people is the same. I once had a chance to date somebody relatively famous, and for a brief period of time, and went to Las Vegas. And twice on that trip, in the floor of the casino, I had two people come up to me and say, "Are you Bill Whittle?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, just want to come up and thank you for the work." And this person who'd been around famous people most of her life said, "I have to tell you, I've seen hundreds of these kind of interactions, but never anything like those two. Usually it's people want to get a picture with you to prove that, they were actually saw you. These people come up to thank you." I said, "Yeah, it's not about me. It's just about me putting down some things that everybody believes in a way that, maybe stick a little bit." And that aspect of it has been the primary motivator. Every time I meet a member, every time I meet somebody, practically every event I'll do, somebody will still come up and say, I started reading in the Eject, Eject, Eject days, so they'll bring a copy of Silent America for me to sign. By the way, an autographed copy of Silent America makes it actually lower in value on eBay. I didn't really realize that.
It's marked.
Yeah, it's marked. It's not in mint condition anymore. So the response of the membership and the person-to-person contact I get, and it has more times than I can count, kind of buffed me up and spun me around, put me back into the fight. But I will tell you this, Scott, I felt this from the beginning, and I feel this way today. And I know you feel this way too, and Steve and all the rest of us. We talk about how do you get up and continue to fight this fight against what seems like overwhelming odds so many other times. And my first answer to that always is, look, I just turned 60. I've led a life of absolute comfort, absolute security. I was stone cold broke for most of that time. It's not like I didn't have my worries or anything. But I got to be 60 years old and never had to worry about my security or freedom. I was never really cold in my life and never really hungry in my life. And all of that is due to the fact that for 250 years, young men and women have signed on the dotted line and gone out into harm's way. And most of them come home, but some of them don't. And when I think about that, certainly when I started doing this, there was and I mean, when I say a moment, I mean literally it was 2 or 3 seconds of me asking myself, do I really want to do this? If I do this, especially on camera, that'll be the end of whatever work I get in Hollywood. That'll be the end of my movie career. It'll be the end of all of the things that I'd wanted to do. And immediately, it flew into my head, oh, that's a real big sacrifice you're making there, guy. That's a real big sacrifice. You may not get the actual movie career you wanted. 18-year-old men who haven't had a chance to get married, live life, experience really much of anything, gone out there and had the only life they have shot away from them in order for you to live in this Disneyland bubble. So once that thought came into my head, complaining was out of the question, and my obligation to not just today's veterans, but to all the veterans before them is constantly on my mind. And the one last thing I would like to say about this is, and I'll be perfectly honest about this. When I started doing the public speaking events, the smallest crowd I ever played to was 2 people, and it was outdoors and it was hot. There were 2 people there, and I remember thinking, it's not the fault of these 2 people that there aren't other people there. I'm going to do the best job I can for them, and went out and talked to them for almost an hour. But I was at one event early, a public event, pretty early in my career. And I remember after the thing was over, a man came up, and he was kind of a big man, and he had on farmer's coveralls. and kind of the farmer shirt and stuff. And for a moment, all of those years of being in Hollywood kind of went through my head and thought, so this is my audience, really? This is it, I mean, the liberals are out there and they're playing to movie stars and stuff, and you get a character from Hee Haw. And I immediately felt bad about that. But what really, really, really changed me and improved me enormously was that this guy had so much of deep interest to say and so many important things to say and such insight into things that I realized then, and I never, ever forgot since then, that every single person that I meet and every single person that you meet and every single person that the people watching the show meet, every one of them knows more than you do about hundreds of things. Hundreds of things they know more than you do, and they know more than just about anybody on a certain handful of things. And that's when I began to really have the ability to open my mind enough to really listen. And the more I listened to regular people, the more I realized two things. The more I realized the wisdom of them, and the more I realized I'm a regular person too. People will say, well, could you do some questions or photos afterwards? And my response is always the same. I will be the last person out of the room. And I've tried very hard to maintain that. So that's basically the story. And there's not a day goes by when I don't amaze myself by walking into this little studio. I've worked over at Daily Wire many times. I have a staff of 100. It's a magnificently run organization. Don't mean to cast the slightest aspersion on them. They are absolutely top notch. And working with them only indicates how tough it is to work. Basically, I mean, I'm here by myself in the studio. You're by yourself in Texas. But I never cease to be grateful every time I open the door for the people who part with their $10 a month or whatever the case may be. I haven't been to work in, 15 years now, maybe something like that. And the gratitude never, ever goes away.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful that we have the opportunity to carry the thoughts and dreams and principles of the people who call themselves members at BillWhittle.com and just be a mouthpiece for those ideas that more people might hear them. We also fully recognize how difficult it is to earn that money that goes into that membership. And we're glad that so many people willingly do that, not so that they can get something. The vast majority of our videos are publicly available. You don't have to have a membership to watch the videos. You have to have a membership to be engaged, to be involved, to be committed, and to be part of the team.
To produce them, yeah.
To produce these videos that spreads these videos around the world so that young knuckleheads like Bill Whittle, the liberal, can hear a message that changes his heart and turns him in the right direction.
I have to add one thing.
Please do.
Since you said young Bill Whittle, the liberal, the knucklehead, I have to add one thing. I'm as serious as this as I can be. Over the not so much recently, but in the mid to early teens, early to mid teens, I had a chance to do several events at the Reagan Library where I was a chance to speak in front of large groups of people at the Reagan. And all three times, the first time was just kind of snuck up on me. And the second time and third time decided to repeat the procedure. But the first time I spoke at the Reagan, I realized that I'm in this room of a man I admire enormously, who at the time he was president, I thought was some senile old lunatic who was going to get us all killed. And so when everything was over and everybody had gone, I kind of went by myself outside the building, and outside of the building, overlooking the Simi Valley, and you can actually see the Pacific from there, is a little circular enclave, and Ronald Reagan is buried there. And I went out there, and I'm serious about this. I bent my head and I apologized to him, and I told him I was wrong about him, and I was wrong about everything that he believed, and that I would do my best to atone for that by doing my best to popularize the principles that this man not only espoused, he became Ronald Reagan on the road during that General Electric tour. He listened to people. He listened to citizens, and he didn't care how big the crowds were. And he listened, and he became Ronald Reagan in that process. And I find that is exactly what has happened to me, to an infinitely lesser degree than Ronald Reagan, obviously. But if you go out and talk to real people and respect them, you will very soon love them, and you will never, ever underestimate them again.
from whom much nonsense has flowed, much atonement is required, and we are grateful that you give us the opportunity to do so. Not only do we want to thank the members at BillWhittle.com, but also our friends over at the Patriot Post who have engaged in a co-promotional effort with us to advance these ideas. We'll put a link to the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, in the description below. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.